You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome back to Business of Drinks. I'm Erica Ducey here with Caroline Lamb, and today we're diving into one of the most creative and fastest growing wineries on California's Central Coast. We're talking field recordings.
And we were joined by the man behind it all, Andrew Jones. He started field recordings almost by accident. He bought a few tons of grapes to try his hand at winemaking so that he could better relate to his customers, who were winemakers, at his day job at the vine nursery. What began as this side project has now grown into a winery that produces more than 50,000 cases a year. And the brand is very quickly growing. And this year it's on track to make 70,000 cases.
I mean, that's huge, especially right now when many wineries are struggling. So I wanted to know what's driving that growth. And as Caroline found out, it's the brand's core wines like the orange wine skins, its entry-level red blend fiction, and its chillable red called Freddo. Now, those SKUs together account for nearly 70% of the brand's production. Plus, Field Recordings has a thriving private label business with national grocery chains like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, as well as several restaurant groups.
Andrew shares some brilliant stories in this conversation, like being the first winery to set up in what is now Tin City before it became a renowned boutique wine destination in Paso Robles, or how his $87 permit and one singular forklift turned into a nationally distributed brand available in 49 states.
And we also get into strategy, discussing how Field Recordings has intentionally leaned into categories that resonate with younger consumers and how they've disrupted the way wine is merchandised at retail.
Absolutely. And Andrew does not hold back in this conversation with his advice for fellow drinks entrepreneurs, from how to structure these private label deals so that they add value to the brand instead of cannibalizing it, as well as really rethinking distributor relationships for the modern era, sharing the unconventional events that his team has been practicing with their distributors across the country in order to cut through the clutter that's happening right now.
Yeah, so, whether you're building a small winery, launching a disruptive drinks brand, or just looking for inspiration on how to scale authentically, this episode, you will find it jam-packed with fresh insights. I learned a ton from Andrew about what's working in wine right now.
So let's get into it with Andrew Jones of Field Recordings.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Is your drinks brand looking to start or expand import and distribution?
Whether you're seeking to enter new markets or you're unhappy with a current distributor and desiring a better fit, you should know about Swig Partners.
Founded by industry experts Eric Siegelbaum and Amy Troutmiller, Swig takes the guesswork and the legwork out of distribution strategy. Swig helps brands and distributors find the right fit for long-term relationships and sales success.
US-based importers and distributors should reach out too. With Swig, they can explore new products for free. And brands, you can get $100 off by mentioning Business of Drinks. Find out more at swigpartners.com/business of drinks. That's swigpartners.com/business of drinks.
Andrew, welcome to the Business of Drinks.
Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you here. So for those who aren't familiar, can you give us a quick background on yourself and what led you to starting Field Recordings?
Yeah, so I got into the vineyard business at the end of 2002. My backstory is and I still do this to this day. I represent a wholesale grapevine nursery throughout the U.S., and I look after their wine grape side of the business, all the forward-facing stuff for the wine grape side of the business. And it's called Sunridge Nurseries. And in California, planting is just done in the springtime. It's very seasonal and all that. And started to realize a couple years into it that I was dealing with the winemakers a lot more than the vineyard managers for picking out what vines they wanted for their new plantation. And so I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to mess around and buy a few tons of grapes and make some wine, and it'll be fun and all that, and it'll keep me busy during the fall, and I'll be able to relate and understand kind of what is going through the winemaker's mind a little bit more. And I'd done some basic winemaking classes in college, but nothing. I have no formal training in enology, and so yeah, in 2007, I purchased my first 4 tons of grapes, and then kind of the rest is history from there. Just we got in this organic rhythm where it just kept growing and growing, and just kept making more wine, and people were into it.
Yeah. So you never really, at the beginning at least, you didn't see this as like, I'm launching a wine brand. It wasn't filling a white space in the market. It was more trying to make yourself a more well-rounded vineyard consultant. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was basically just become more well-rounded, wine industry or vineyard industry professional. I wanted to tell the stories of my days on the road. It was also kind of a thing with the wines. The winemaking world can be such like kind of a copycat culture and stuff. And there's so many like things that are very backwards in it too, that go back to just things that people find traditional and all that. And so yeah, I kind of wanted to tell the story of what I felt were underdog vineyards or underdog varieties and stuff that were unique for the Central Coast of California.
Yeah. So from what I know, it's Field Recordings is a big collection of the places and people that you value. So how do you think that over the years you have translated that into something that resonates with people beyond yourself?
That I'm still always amazed at. It's like every day that we have the bottling line here, and it's like, who the heck is drinking all this stuff? And I still kind of wonder that. But yeah, I don't know. It's still like I also have this kind of ongoing joke that at some point we're going to be a real winery and all that. Like at this point, I still look at the whole thing as like, we're kind of just messing around, even though it's it is a full on business at this point.
Yeah, I would say most people would consider producing tens of thousands of cases of wine not messing around anymore. But I kind of want to go back to the early days and think about the name Field Recordings and how that helped you shape just what the wine is and what the brand is as a whole. Explain Field Recordings to us?
Yeah, so it was actually a suggestion from a couple friends of mine that were helping me early on with telling my story, and introduced me to this whole deal. One of them actually had some extensive training in the music side of things and sound and all that, and it was this recording of a natural occurrence, and he related a lot to. Essentially it's a really good analogy for the whole concept of terroir, people, place, and time captured in a bottle. A lot of people think of the terroir deal as being more dirt oriented and climate oriented, but there is always that human element. And I think we bring that human element in a little bit more. And the human element's really important to me on things, on stuff with who we get grapes from and all that. But yeah, it was just kind of this simple analogy for, and the other thing too is even though we do make some wines that are, blends and things that, I do try to have consistent every year, at the same time I embrace the seasonality of it. And I'm not trying to make a cocktail wine that, no matter what, I'm not forcing anything to be something that it's not. The vintage gives us what it's going to give us. And I'm okay with that. Some of our main wines that are multi-varietal blends, like, our main wine, we're up to 15 varieties in it this last year, and it just keeps growing and all that. So it's not, we're okay evolving and changing and all that. And it's kind of what the season gives us and what, kind of the next thing. So.
Yeah. Coming from the vineyard perspective, is there a certain set of criteria that you're like looking for when you're choosing vineyards, or can you walk us through that?
I like, there's a couple different things. We still work with majority owner operators, which is big. We do buy grapes though from some of the big investment funds that that have massive holdings in California these days. But we do try to lean on owner operators. I'm big on kind of the combination of the plant that is there with that little nook and cranny that it's planted in. And I just have kind of like a, little thought in my mind about what I think that those will lead to in certain wines, and all that. But really depends on the program that it's going into. For skins, for example, uh, there's really no limit because there's no playbook on how to make skin contact white wine. So, I think the possibilities are endless on things that we can potentially use in those wines. And then other things though too though, like, our main red wine that we make, or one of our main wines, Fiction, it's always a Zinfandel based blend, but very conscious of, like, Zinfandel is always relatively high in alcohol. So how can I bring the Zin component without all the booze that Zin's known for? And so we started working a lot of Charbonneau into the blend, which basically gives us the same blending character, but then at about 3 to 4% less booze, and all that, or that's what we find in the cellar at least. But so there's a little different, like, nuances to all of them depending on what we want to make, and all that. And then also on top of it too, like, we do a lot of sparkling wine as well, and, like, we got to take kind of like the touch and feel out of it, and it really comes down to, like, will this vineyard produce grapes that are at the right chemistry that we can make proper bubbles.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just while you were talking about the blends of those two really higher volume wines for you, Skins and Fiction, do you, in your opinion, do you think other wineries, specifically in California, get a little bit too hung up on the varietal composition of a wine versus what, it's actually going to taste like? Or is, because you kind of seem like one of the only people I know that doesn't really care about that at all.
Maybe I just am not so specific on flavor profiles on stuff, or I'm not so picky on that it has to be just like this and every year has to taste exactly the same and all that. Like, it's okay that it pivots a little bit and all that. And also too, like, I mean, in the end, I'm telling the story of the place where I live and where we grow grapes and all that. Like, so, I still can tell that story with letting the wine evolve a little bit for anything I want to do stylistically. And the winemaking style, the stylistic thing really is choosing which grapes we want to use for it. But it's not really like changes on things in the cellar.
Absolutely. So let's talk about where you are. You are in Tin City in Paso Robles. When you first arrived there, to my knowledge, it wasn't really the destination that it is today. So what made you want to set up your winery there?
It was a nice, quiet place to make wine. And also, it was going to be low profile originally. When I signed that lease, it was my landlord, the developer, he went down to his office. I'm looking for a quiet place to make wine. I'm ready for my own place. I had all my own equipment. The only thing I didn't have, because I'd been making the wine in co-op facilities, and the only thing I didn't have on my own was a forklift. And so literally it was like, find a building, buy a forklift, I'm good to go. I have everything else that's needed and I can make this happen. And I met Mike and toured through his buildings, and he at the time he thought it would be a good place to have some wineries, and he had done some work with the local county government to get wineries here. And it's actually a really great story. He, like, did all the legwork for me ahead of time with one of the planning folks at the county office, and went to his office and he gave me the paperwork that I needed to take down to the county. He's like, fill this out, you're going to go down there. And I always remember, for some reason, I remember the planner's name was Steve. And it was like, if Steve's not there, you're not talking to anybody else. You're going to take off and you're going to come back and find out when Steve's there. And when you meet Steve, like, you only answer yes or no questions and you don't expand on anything. It's very simple, to the point. Like, he had the whole thing, like, kind of queued up for what the county needed. And so I got lucky. I went down to the county office with my paperwork, and I walked out of the county office later after talking to Steve with a winery permit for $87 and 15 minutes of my time. It's like unheard of in these days of starting wineries in California. And so I was the first winery here in Tin City. Now we have, I think there's actually over 40 tenants total down here now. It's a lot different place, but yeah, even like there's a newer section that was getting built at the time when I moved down here. I went from one of the old warehouses It was like he was charging a little bit less for that. It was this nice little quiet spot down by the railroad tracks. And, the one thing that's interesting with Tin City is it has zero road visibility. We're tucked behind a couple of tractor dealerships and a diesel mechanic shop and all that. So to find Tin City, it's a lot of work. Like the way this whole thing is turned to being a destination, it still cracks me up to this day. Because we're not retail consumer friendly here. So
No, but it sounds like you are largely responsible for that as the first one to stake their claim. That's awesome.
it was interesting too, as people were moving down here, they wanted to set up tasting rooms. My good buddy, Brian Teresi, he's got a winery called Giornata, and then he has a pasta factory down here called Eto. And actually Brian was the one that always thought that we could turn it into a retail hub, that it could be a destination. And I used to tell him, like, no one's coming down here. Like, this is a place for us to just lay low, make wine. Because also at the time too, when I started making wine too, I was fully kind of insecure about it too. Like I pay my mortgage by working at a grapevine nursery, and the last thing I wanted all my clients to think was I was starting another winery in town. Like my priority always is to take care of folks with their vines. Wine is always second and all that. So it was a perfect fit for me at first, and then with the attention that Tin City got over the past few years and all the new tenants that are down here, it's a whole nother environment.
Oops.
Yeah.
So last month, I had the pleasure of being in the same place as you, as your team was on a tour across the country and you stopped in Michigan. So we were talking and you told me that year to date, you guys are up roughly 30%, which is pretty awesome right now for California wine, for all the stories that we've been hearing over the past couple of years as many face headwinds. So can you tell us a little bit about what is driving that growth?
Yeah. So our core business is growing, like our core wines. I'm definitely in that phase right now where it's always this whole thing of like more wines, less wines. And like, you're always kind of like trying to keep things interesting and do new stuff, but then at the same time, get more focus. You kind of go back and forth on that constantly. And we're definitely in like a focusing period for field recordings. But then at the same time, though, there's so much opportunity out there right now with the available fruit and wine and everything. So we do some control and private label business as well, which has really created an even bigger uptick for us. But like to the core, Skins, Freddo, Fiction still are in a good spots for us. And that's really the heart of the business.
Absolutely. So Skins, Freddo, Fiction, those are your three core field recordings SKUs. Can you conceptualize, like, of your 50,000 plus cases that you produce a year, what of that is those three?
So those wines account for over 60% of what we make, and actually pushes 70% of what we make.
Yeah. And specifically, the label business that you're doing, is that mostly Trader Joe's?
We've worked with them. We work with some other grocery chains. We work with restaurant groups. We have some great restaurant group partners where we've helped them like kind of legitimize the private label on the by the glass menu. Like it's kind of notorious for for restaurant groups to just find someone to put, real inexpensive stuff in bottle and just have it on their by the glass thing as their house Pinot or house Cab. And there's been a ton of opportunity in that space too, that, we've basically been able to link up restaurant groups with specific vineyards that we work with. And it's a win-win for everybody, where we're able to provide stuff that's super affordable and pencils great for a BTG menu. And that restaurant literally can like trace it back to a vineyard on the Central Coast. And they can, it's not just, the random juice that was in the cellar or somebody else's bulk wine that you're blending up and things like that. So we do a lot of that. We've had some opportunities in grocery with stuff like Traders, or different smaller regional East Coast chains. Also some stuff out west here. We still I think my largest customer still in the country is Whole Foods. They've been very good to us through the years and really been helped incubate the brand. But yeah, kind of all the things there. And that's another thing too. Like we're not, I think field recordings I think we're very comfortable as this like craft sort of small winery, and we're the larger side of a small winery. But then at the same time though, like I'm not picky on like anybody that is willing to carry one of my wines. Like I'm so thankful for that opportunity because there's so many choices out there. So hey, if it's, the super hip new restaurant in town that wants to put us as one of their limited by the glass selections, or it's chain grocery wants us to do a very affordable everyday red blend, like I'm happy with all of it. Like in the end, anything I can do to put more good wine out there, get more people to choose to drink wine over the other alternatives is a win. So I don't like that's kind of a classic old school wine sales thing. Like when you go out to see a distributor, like, well, I'm only going to A accounts for the day, like no B's, no C's on accounts. And I'm like, any account is an A account. Like there's so many options for them. Like, I'll take whatever I can do. And then also too, with some of those larger chain type stuff, it's also interesting with them wanting to carry some of the product types that I've specialized in over the years and seeing things change where it's like, hey, we're going to put an orange wine on a end cap stack at a major grocery store. Like that's awesome. Like we're changing we're disrupting this whole business and the layout of things. Like, if we're able to get those folks to do pet nat orange wine, chilled reds, like, the more square inches of the cold box that we can take up with chilled reds versus whites and rosés, like that's such a win.
That's a huge win.
We got to rethink this stuff and all that. Like, and it's cool to see some of those large retailers rethinking because it's so formulaic. That was one of the coolest classes I remember when I got an ag business degree at Cal Poly, and like we had a presenter one day that came and talked to us about like the science of laying out a grocery store, and like all the it's like that old bar rescue show on steroids a little bit on how they like the method to the madness. There's actually a grocery store in our area that they did as a class project to redo the layout. It's
Wow.
the worst store to go to ever because it's not the normal one they're used to. But
it's like the student driver version.
Yeah, but yeah, no, like all that stuff. Like I'm willing to do anything. I have no, anybody, and especially for the types of wines that we specialize in too. Like, I mean, it's kind of a personal goal for me. Like orange wine is our number one thing, and that like, hey, if we can dominate that category and be like your go-to reliable skin contact white wine, like I'm all for it. I don't, I'm not one to, hate on the small indie band that signs with the major label. Like it's okay. Like they're doing a good job. There's a reason why they got signed, so
yeah,
I'll take it.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Whole Foods being kind of your biggest and longest large supporter. How did that relationship come about in the beginning? And like, how did you kind of prove yourself to a store like that you could handle that?
Yeah, so we started out like pre-Amazon acquisition for Whole Foods. We were working a lot with their California team, and we were showing good numbers in California. We started out with doing some sales in NorCal. Then we started doing some stuff in Southern California, and the regional buyer in Southern California wanted to do some custom items for the store where they were early adopters for trying out cans and all that. And so we used to do a ton of can wine back in the day. So I started canning with the 2012 vintage and I canned through 2018. And then we sold the brand at that point and I got out of cans. But yeah, cans were huge. And we did this custom like lineup of can wines for Whole Foods in SoCal. That was a huge drop for us at the time. And there was a whole feature that they did. It was like they would rotate through the year where I think the wine buyer would only get to do the actual like feature spots, like 1 or 2 months out of the year. And so like the buyer at the time basically took us up on it to put fiction cans at the time. That was at the time when I was actually doing fiction in all the formats, kegs, bottles, and cans.
Oh, wow.
And we did, so we had this whole display in all the Whole Foods there. And then when Amazon acquired them and all that, then it changed the scope of things, but we had kind of proven ourselves in California, and California is by far their largest state, I want to say.
Yeah.
And so, then started talking to the national buyers, like, well, you've been doing these great things for us in California. Like, what else could you do? And actually our first national drop it shipped in March and April of 2020. And I remember kind of freaking out that we'd gone all in to they were doing a big Pet Nat Rosé display at Whole Foods, and I was like, we were stretching a little bit to like make as much as we did, and to make Pet Nat on that scale was a first time for us, and all that,
How much
and
did
it,
you have to make for that drop?
so that drop, I want to say, was just shy of 4,000 cases.
Okay.
So the and then the world shutting down. I was like, well, if Whole Foods, as long as Whole Foods stays open, I'm going to be able to make it to get to harvest and stuff. That was,
Yeah.
we were going through all that and all that stuff. But yeah, that was our first big drop, and we've done might push into a dozen custom projects for them, or different things through the years. Different stuff that they wanted certified organic out of certain varietal wines or different sparkling wines. And that's the other thing too. That's funny. Like we have a wine that we make today that's one of our best-selling core. It's part of our core kind of 9 wines that we do, and it's a value everyday certified organic sparkling wine called Salad Days.
Yeah.
And that actually started as a Whole Foods wine, and now I don't actually sell any to them, and we basically sell it all to independents and on-premise accounts.
Wow.
And so one of those things that's kind of interesting. Everybody, like a lot of the small independents, would be like, well, as soon as you sell your wine to a grocery store, that wine's going to die. And like for us with Salad Days, it's been the total opposite. Like I think we got 2 or 3 restaurants, that have been featured on Chef's Table that have poured Salad Days by the glass for a good chunk of time and stuff. And I know one of them still does to this day.
So don't let anyone tell you going to Whole Foods first is going to kill
the
label.
It's not killing the label and all that. But like I think Whole Foods does get a little bit different treatment than other grocery stores at times, and and even stuff too, like the Trader Joe's stuff that we do, like it's custom labels, it's their control labels, and that's what they want to do and all that. So like actually you can go to Trader Joe's and you won't see one sign of a Field Recordings wine in there. It's all part of the private label biz. Even though there are some states though that will have some of our core wines there too, depending on the distributor. So
okay, so that kind of leads me into my next question, which is with these chain retail exclusives, how do you structure them in a way that producing those doesn't cannibalize your sort of core Field Recordings wines, or even on the shelf they don't compete too hard? Like, can you tell us how you think about that?
There's never a perfect scenario. You're always going to have something where somebody might choose to buy the private label versus your core wine, but at the same time though, it's like I think of some of that stuff though too, though, is like a little bit of that, was it rising tides raise all boats or whatever?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like if we're given the opportunity to even do some wines, even if it isn't like my brand that's going in there, like we're still providing a unique, fun, everyday wine that, people are enjoying and all that. And like, it's one of those things too. I look at all the stuff too. It's like, even going back to what I do for my day job and stuff, the more people we can get drinking wine, the better. There's so many choices out there, and, just that's the win overall, is to get people to remember that wine is the most unique alcoholic beverage choice out there. And it's the like truly the most special, and like no BS on this one too. Like it's the least commoditized. There's a reason why there's that many bottles on every store shelf. It's because it can be that different, and stuff. And so so doing that stuff, even though it doesn't take away from my brand, it actually like it helps the team. Like I have 14 team members now, and I think 6 of them are head of households, and we're like, for our scale too, like, it's been a pretty cool thing to be able to provide health insurance and the retirement plan and all that kind of stuff. Those are the little things that have like started to make it where we're kind of getting to be like a real business. But then I still kind of go back to like at some point we'll be a real winery. But yeah, no, it's all that stuff helps. Like we have a great facility here. We're capable of doing a lot of different things. And so we need to embrace that. Like if it's, and my team's on board for that too. Like I think my least seasoned seller team member has been with me for 5 years now. So we have very low turnover. The crew gets it, and they realize that like, we have some we have a team that's so loyal to field recordings, and it's been great to, to see their growth through the years. But they also get it that like, hey, they have all these friends in the industry that might work at some really wild, super small, artisanal, fancy winery, but like, they also, those are limiting on the opportunities there. This is a business they've been able to grow with, and their growth really, they know that their growth lies more in like the fact that if we can grow this into being a bigger winery versus upward movement for everybody, like the more stuff we can do with the team that we have, it's a reward for everybody in the long run, and everybody can kind of keep growing their career.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you kind of briefly map how you went from this being a couple people to 16 people? And like, if there is a small artisanal brand listening that's thinking like, wow, I want to provide that for my people. I do want to grow like that. Like, how do you hire in a strategic way where you don't blow it all or you're not totally understaffed?
Yeah. So we do it two ways on things. Like, so I invest heavy in the back of house. Those are like my core people. The seller team, good folks on the accounting side. Also good people like running the overall hospitality wine club. Like that's super important, and all that. We typically, for the tasting room side, we'll go more just like hourly, seasonal. We get a lot of college students that work through there, and we will get a little bit more turnover and cycle through there just because we also are, hiring mostly college students for the workers there. But then at the same time, though, it gives some nice youthful energy to the tasting room. And I think that helps overall in the long run, that you got, people are going to have their window that they, they're 2 to 3 years that they're going to college, that they're 21 years old and can work in a wine tasting room. And they're stoked on that. But, hey, they term out at a certain point. You got to get fresh blood in there and all that. Cause I mean, that is a tricky thing too. Like, it's a game for me. I always like, how can I tell the story of skins all day and try not to say the same exact spiel twice? If I'm doing 8 presentations through a day on the sales route, and messing with that. But yeah, no, like we've gotten lucky on stuff. I have a really good assistant winemaker. He's been with me for 10 years, kind of a core personality here at the winery, and all that. And like, that's huge for me. The other thing too is, I try to expose all my production team members to some sort of forward facing things from time to time. So like when you and I saw each other in Michigan and all that, was 2 seller team members out on the road doing promotion across the US. And it gives everybody such a different perspective, being out there, seeing where this wine goes, how it does connect with a lot of people and all that. And it raises the stoke level to come to work every day. So
yeah, absolutely. I do want you to sort of talk about the Field Recordings Taste America, which I think is what we finally landed on was the name of that. What that kind of was this summer, because it was interesting to see how impactful it ended up being, even just in the market that I'm in, how much, I mean, just FaceTime on social media, the brand got over all the other brands that the distributor represents. That's a constant battle for brands is how do we get top of mind at a distributor that's representing thousands of SKUs? So tell us a little bit about that.
Pete and Jack. So Jack is our enologist here, and then Pete is our kind of utility player on the team. Like he can do anything from winemaking to facilities to, he's our resident. I think we put resident DJ even on his business cards and stuff, because he actually does split time. He's a wedding DJ and photographer on the weekends, and then works at the cellar during the week and all that. And so middle of harvest, they're like, hey, like, what do you think? We want to go on the road and we'll do promotion for the winery next summer. And I'm like, you guys want to do it? Really? Like, yeah, no, we really want to do it. It's like, all right, I'll set it up. It was something that, I travel a lot. I'll spend around 16 weeks a year on the road here and there. But to like take a 2-month window and fully be on the road, like I can't do that. I have 4 kids at home, and it's brutal. I mean, the travel as is brutal on family life. and all that. And so I was like, if you two are up for it, like we'll do it. Like, let's block off this window. This is when we're going to go and do it. And it was kind of perfect timing because it was also on my to-do list to get Jack more involved in sales, and that's one of those things too, because you want, like, it's also one of, like, when you're out on the road and or even from the distributor side or the consumer side, it's always better to talk to somebody that's actually involved in making the thing rather than just this brand ambassador. And so, yeah, we put it all together. We leaned on I have a friend in Toledo, Ohio, that helps me a little bit with national sales. And so I leaned on Adam to be like, all right, we're gonna kind of anchor the trip on Ohio and Michigan and kind of his core area, and then I'll build out the front and back end around it. And before you know it, we had literally had booked out almost 8 full weeks of stuff. The boys traveled. I think they drove over 9,000 miles. We went as far north as Traverse City, Michigan. We went as far east as Virginia Beach. Did events in Arizona, Nebraska, Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, North Carolina, Virginia, DC, Maryland, Missouri, and then Oklahoma. That was the whole route. So I had to get him home from Oklahoma. We weren't able to do anything past that because Jack's brother was getting married the weekend after the event in Oklahoma. So I had 1 week to get him home. The main thing on that is, like, yeah, we wanted to, I think it was a perfect example of like what field recording is all about. Like, we're a young team. I'm the oldest person on the team at 45. I think there is a youthful energy to the wines that we make, and it's a perfect representation of my team that works here and works so hard to put them in a bottle. And then also at the same time too, like, there's so many unique personalities in winemaking and all that. And in the end, like, I mean, we're a unique bunch, I guess you could say, but we're a pretty relatable everyday group of people that work here. We come from all over the place. Like, I have a lot of team members that are not from California. So I got 3 of my main ones are Indiana, Kentucky, and Arizona that have been with me forever. And we're just like, and there is that culinary art side to winemaking and all that. And I think that there's a lot of winemakers that kind of take on more of that role as the artist when they're out on the road. And, and we make a product that, I don't know, it's also one of those things too. I think when you get out there and we're pouring field recordings and everybody meets the team behind field recordings, and it's, you make orange wine and these weird pet nats, and they think that we're going to be like a little bit more, like the group and the people behind them is going to be as esoteric as the wines we specialize in. And then we're just like regular group of, this is our trade. We all just figured out how to make wine. And all that. So it's, it was really impactful, I think, for the trip. I'm really happy. We're actually already working on what we're going to do for next year.
Wow.
And all that. Like, we want to get back at it. It's like, and there's so much good stuff that we can do. And the other thing too with that whole trip too is, like, we did a lot of the normal distributor stuff. Like, we would do general sales meetings, we would do trade tastings. But even for the stuff that we did, like, I mean, the night you and I, the event that we did there in Detroit was wild with at the old German beer hall and stuff. That, we turned into a wine pop up for the night, and like, wine, and it's also one of those things too. It's like, you think of that format, like, this isn't a spot that we think is going to be a wine venue, but we can have wine wherever. Like, wine, it works, and I don't know, and also the odd type of wines that we make too work, and all that. So it's we still are doing our, like, kind of recap of the trip and figuring out, like, to try to monetize it and everything too, to see, really what, overall cost and all the things, and how many people we reach though. But, like, for the amount of markets that we hit, I know for a fact, just with the rough math that we did already, like, it was a way better use of funds versus me flying to each of those states for 1 week and doing the typical distributor work. and all that. And even on that too, like, for small wineries and stuff and all that, like think of different ways when you go to the market. Like don't just go pack a bag around with the distributor sales rep. Like I think there's other things you can do to add value and help with the brand, and and focus more on educating the sales team at those distributors. You don't have to be going account to account. It's just to make an impact, and that was actually a big thing for that trip. That was I was really impressed with. It was just the general amount of trade that we got to come to the events, and stuff like the party that we threw at in Traverse City that night before I came down to see you in Detroit. It was so amazing at this place called Little Fleet in Traverse City. Awesome, like outdoor bar restaurant type deal with some food trucks incorporated, killer venue. But like we didn't pack the bag around at all in the Traverse City area, and we had probably like a dozen accounts roll in to come hang out at the event for the night, try the wines, got to talk to them all. It was on like neutral turf. Like it wasn't, sitting there at their tasting counter going through the stuff. Like, and it was great. The exposure that we got, and I couldn't have seen all 12 of those people if I were going account to account through the day, and all that. So, I think it made a big impact. I think it was a good thing for the winery. It was great for the general feel for my production team. Even too, since they've been back, the other team members that didn't go on the trip, like they're like, even for them, like they can listen to me talk about like, oh, I was, at this place in Virginia, you wouldn't have believed what they did with skins for the night. It was like the coolest pairing, and we had this whole event around it and all that. But like hearing it from Jack and Pete is a whole different perspective than me saying it and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was, like, I got like 2 or 3 concepts for tours in the queue that I think, like, I don't know. That's one thing I've even asked Pete too, because I was like, Pete, when do you think, like, at what point, do you think you're going to tell, or like, when are you going to come to me and tell me, like, I just am not into that at all anymore? And he's like, I was really hitting my stride as the thing was ending. I was like, all right. So Jack, on the other hand, it was a little trickier for Jack, but Jack also had the cot in the RV that they were going around in, where Pete did have the normal bed.
Oh boy.
And Jack had to be on a little bit more than Pete, because Pete kind of took on the general like management of things and responsibilities, and then he was kind of setting up and planning for the events in the evening time, where Jack would do the general sales meetings. He did pack the bag around a few times here and there, and exposed to a couple more things, and what it got to be more of just a straight road trip for Pete, where it was a little different for Jack. So
yeah,
it's tough when you're on a tiny cot.
I think that's really valuable, though, in terms of just rethinking what distributor relationships can look like, and like pushing your distributors to get really creative with the types of events that people are looking for. We've been talking about this a lot with like traditional sit down pre-fee wine dinners, and how those just really aren't the answer for a lot of places. And if you're sending somebody into town thinking about just better ways to engage, is it that person guest somming on the floor for the night if they have the personality for it, or throwing a party, like you said, that just makes people actually want to come over like a very stodgy sit down situation. So
we did a general sales meeting in Phoenix where we rented a pool for 4 hours, and it was a pool party for 4 hours, and we poured all the wines. Well, I guess it's one of the things probably you can only pull off in Arizona in the heat, but like literally they have like an Airbnb site that just rents swimming pools and stuff.
Lovely.
And so it was great. We had a great, it was, all over the board on stuff that we did through that trip and all. And yeah, just showing so many different places we can pour wine and do wine educational stuff.
Did you go to every state that you have a wholesaler in, or how many states are you in with wholesale?
We're in 49 states currently, everything but North Dakota. And so, everything, we have distributors established. Also, we had some states that we went to that like we were kind of hitting them because it was on the route to other ones. We built out on some of our more major markets to start off with. And then I think some of the biggest victories of that trip were some of the stuff that was like, I don't want to say it was filler, but it was, I didn't expect like I didn't expect like Louisville and Indianapolis to go off as much as it did. Like it was, there was things like that. Omaha, like we did an event in like the farthest like southwest suburb of Omaha. That was like one of the most memorable events that the guys did the whole trip. And things like that. So there was all kinds of stuff along the way that just kind of just were huge successes for us.
So in an interview from a couple of years ago, you mentioned working with about 28 ranches across the Central Coast while sort of expanding up to the Slow Coast in that time. How has that sourcing map changed in the last couple of years? And what % of the tons that you're harvesting are now certified organic or in conversion? Is that something that's a priority?
Yeah, so that is one thing we are pushing towards, is to get everything certified. Right now, we fall roughly about a third certified organic, a third practicing, and a third that are just sustainable. The one thing is we'll never fully get rid of some sustainable vineyards because we get fruit from some historical vineyards that I'm just thankful that I get that fruit. I can't go in there and dictate farming methods and all that. I literally was up at Chalon this morning sampling our Chenin Blanc that was planted in 1907. Like I can't tell the vineyard owner that you need to specify your farming practices. I'm just thankful that I get a little, allocation of that fruit. There's only 3 of us that get it. And stuff. So, but at the same time though, like, so that's one thing with the wines that we make. And, like we get embraced a lot by the natural wine scene, but it was nothing that we set out to be in or anything like that. A lot of it just comes down to my background on how I make wine. I'm a nurseryman, viticulture person by trade. So I'm still lost going to the winemaking supply store that sells all the magic powders and things.
Oh boy.
But yeah, no, like, so for us, it's like, if I have a good vineyard, it's my job not to mess it up. And it'll show through in the bottle, and all that. I've gotten more into the organic thing. I think that's just something that, as a parent of 4 kids between 15 and 9, like we buy organic produce for the kids at the house. I do think there's something there with organics that like just because it's organic doesn't necessarily mean it's better, but I do think it's, one of those things that I think it should be embraced by a lot of people. Let's not consume things with a bunch of chemicals on them, kind of thing. And even on that too, with like the stuff that we get where it's sustainable, like we can work with vineyards and eliminate Roundup out of it entirely and, not have any glyphosate sprayed in any of those vineyards. But, we have some vineyards that are in some tricky areas where, you can have something in your repertoire that you can use for treating some bugs that are prevalent in the area, or you can let those bugs bring more virus into those vines and shorten the life of the vineyard. So what truly is more sustainable there? Like the fact that you treated something that was synthetic for those pests, or that we let a vineyard die in 15 years, or not die, but be uneconomical to make fine wine in 15 years, where we should get 30 to 50 years out of that if we do it right. So yeah, so the organic thing, definitely something that, into fully support. We're trying to get, and the other thing too, with, the great debate of, the proper way wine should be made. I think that's the only thing that everybody can agree on that are looking for low intervention wines, is that we should be pushing for more organic. And I'm fully on board with that myself. So, and even too, like, I always had this whole thing too, like we don't use I don't sort anything at the winery. Like everything's just like, we sort in the field as we're harvesting. Like a good harvest crew is better than, any fancy machinery that I might have here, for sorting and things like that, and we build complexity through non-uniformity. And when you have an organic vineyard, like the stresses of that, the weed pressure that gets out there, all those things, like, I think that plays into a little bit of things why we end up liking some of the wines at times. Because if you look at an organic vineyard versus a conventional vineyard, the organic vineyard is not as pretty typically. Like, the growth will be a little bit more variable. The weeds will be present and all that. It's not like these super clean, crisp rows that are just like, it's surgical almost the way that they're laid out on the landscape. And I think that's one of the things that comes into it too. Like, hey, we might have a few vines that are a little riper and a few that are a little underripe, and hey, it's all going to go together, and I'm good with that. Like, it's still like it's a snapshot of that place in that year and all that. So I think it can make things more interesting, especially when you make the style of wines that we make, where it's a little bit lower in alcohol, a little bit higher in acid. If you use a lot of, like, that's the big thing too. We ferment everything with native yeast. If I were to go buy lab yeast for all this stuff, like, it would ferment so fast and so clean that it would be a relatively sterile product. I don't know. It's a weird mentality that I have on it too. It's like, I think there's some very practical things that we get out of having this low intervention approach. So
Yeah. And from you're talking about this wildness and this non uniformity from a trend perspective, with the way that wine drinking trends are moving, driven mostly by younger people, do you feel that that's something that they respond positively to, and that's something that they're like looking for, or it's just what you want to do?
it's what I want to do, but also, like, I think it's a very authentic way of, like, showing our products and all that. Like, and I think that's one thing that's even too, for like where we've clicked with some younger consumers out there, and the demographics, I guess, that support field recordings. I mean, we get it all over the board. Like, our club party this last spring. I mean, I don't know if we talked about this at all when we saw each other, but we did a whole feature for our club with Super Nario, and I set up a Nario kart track in our parking lot. And I mean, I had people from 7 to 70, hanging out at our club party and racing tricycles around the parking lot or whatever. But we do generally, like, have a younger audience for field recordings, and I think they appreciate the way that we present the wines and how we make the wines and all that is just, we're big on the authenticity of things, and I think the customers, can feel it. It's one of those things too. It's like a little bit of the farmer's market approach. Like, is the produce that you're buying at the farmer's market necessarily always better than what you can get from, like, one of your specialty or from, like, a really good grocer? Maybe not, but there's a feel good approach to it, because you're like, that person behind the table had a good part in bringing that, head of lettuce or whatever, tomatoes to the market, kind of thing. And I think our wines kind of show that way too, where it has this connection like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the entirety of the wines being produced under the Field Recordings roof, can you tell us the cases that you shipped out across the country last year, the number, and then what you're forecasting for this year? And then, if possible, sort of the rough mix of how that distributes between on-prem, off-prem, and direct-to-consumer.
Last year was about 50,000. I think we have a shot at about 70 this year. When it's all said and done, kind of see where the end of the year takes us, and all that. But, like, on a good track. For us, our goal every year, we go into every year hoping that we can do 10% DTC. We've never actually hit 10% direct to consumer.
Okay.
But it's always like, we get really close every year, but that's always like a thing for us. And that's growing too. Like, I mean, we still have a growing wine club, which, I know a lot of people are kind of struggling with the wine club thing right now. But yeah, no, that area is still growing. The other thing too that's interesting is, like, actually for us, our tasting room traffic is down.
Okay.
With the amount of heads coming into the tasting room, but our club and our e-commerce are up and way up. So that's, like, offsetting it to where the direct to consumer side is in a good plus for us for the year.
So are you acquiring most of your new club members online then, not through your tasting room?
Yeah, through online. No, yeah, we get a lot online, but we still, though, like, we still get I think actually the majority of our club members still are signed up in the tasting room. I should know the actual rate of that, but our rate is relatively high right now of conversions for folks that end up signing up to the club.
You said it is relatively high?
Is relatively high, yes.
Yeah. Do you have a general sense of, like, when people are joining in the tasting room, how long they're sticking around, and, like, what their average spend is when they come visit you?
Average spend, I don't know exactly the average spend, but I want to say that we're, like, over 3 years for average tenure, which I think typically it's like year to year and a half, I want to say, for a wine club member, and we're double the turnover rate.
What do you think is driving that retention?
I think we do a good balance of bringing new things to the table, but then also like having some classics that they always like. So like in the springtime, typically we bring out more of our experimental stuff. And then the fall for the holidays are more of our like timeless classics that we've done forever. Um, and that's one thing that's actually interesting too, though. Even with those two mixed, more people get stoked on the spring shipment than the fall. Like we do have like a very core long-term set that have been with us. Like, I mean, we still have a bunch of wine club members that were some of our initial signups and everything. They've been through everything with us. And they love the original offerings and all that. But most of the new folks that come in are more into the experimental stuff we do in the spring.
Okay.
But then we also supplement that too. We added a second club a couple of years ago. We do a lot of sparkling wines.
Yeah.
And so we have a bubbles club as well. So, and then actually the other thing too, between the standard wine club and the bubbles club, about 30% are in both.
Oh, okay.
So that's been the one thing that's surprising too, is the amount of people that do just, all things that I think we call it the All Things Field Recordings Club.
Okay.
And so the Bubbles Club is a little bit more rigid. It's two different sparkling offerings. One we try to hit before like big weekends. So you like always get your wine before Memorial Day in the spring, and you get your wine right before Thanksgiving for the holiday shipment on that. But there's not a lot of customization that gets done on that.
Okay.
Whereas in the spring and fall, like our classic ones, you're allowed to customize whatever you want. So, and then the other thing we do too that our members really appreciate is we do killer case add-ons for the club shipment. And I'm always amazed with like, we'll send an extra 4 or 5 pallets out of just case add-ons.
Oh, wow.
Which is really cool too on stuff like and that's one thing that I get really stoked on is people choose one of our wines to be like their house wine, that they always have it for whatever, going to a friend's house, and they end up being brand ambassadors essentially for us on things. And, that's been a huge success, is that whole program. And
what kind of discount are you offering for the case add-ons?
So typically the case add-ons are, it's $150 for a case of wine. So on wines that retail for, $20 to $25. So, but you can't sub on that. You're getting a solid case of wine. We literally are just, and actually it goes back. I worked with my first tasting room job ever. I worked, Bonnie Doon used to have a tasting room in Paso Robles way back. And I used to work with this guy. His name was AJ. And AJ worked at the tasting room on weekends, but he was also an actor at the local melodrama down in Grover Beach. And so he was a very animated personality stuff. And he had this whole thing that there was like, there's 2 things that you have to do in life. And I still I can vividly remember standing next to him at the bar at the old Sycamore Farms as he's doing this whole spiel. It's 2 things that you just have to do in life. One, you got to buy a new car. You got to have at one point in your life that feeling of the new car, that true new car stand. He had this whole thing to it. And then the second thing you got to do is you got to buy a solid case of wine. You got to have a wine that you like, where you get a whole case of it, and that is your wine that's going to be on your table, no matter if you have your cousins over for the night or just the neighbors, or you're showing off for some friends that are coming over. You have a wine that is just your house table wine on this whole thing. Yeah. And I was like, that is kind of cool. Like people, and so I go back to that even when we do the case add-ons and stuff. It's like, hey, fiction is your go-to Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, whatever, which is surprising that fiction and Freddo are actually the ones that are like most frequently added on. And that's just what people stock, it's, you can't go wrong with those 2. So,
yeah, understood.
But yeah, that whole spiel, I always hear him saying that thing. So
I need to do the new car one. Some food for thought after this.
There you go.
So thinking about we're talking about your tasting room, which is a smaller percentage than your chain retail sales. Do you have specific targets that you're trying to hit, in units per store per week for those core wines in your key chains? And are you hitting them? And what are you doing to hit those?
The biggest measurable for me is average transaction size. So that's the biggest thing. I don't we can only do so much to drive traffic to the Central Coast. and all that. Like the biggest thing for me is making sure that my team is getting the most out of the folks that come through the door. That's the most important thing. Like we could have had a down month, but if our average transaction is up, I'm still happy for that month because, with all the different stuff going on in the world, with all the different things you can choose for where you're going to choose, for your weekend trip and all that, like, it's, that's the main thing for me. And then also too, like if I see that go down, then it's like, all right, well, how are we doing on staff right now? Do we have enough staff? Are we properly staffing? Like, and kind of looking at that combo with like visitors that we have, because that's always like, people, it's always tricky on how many people to have in your tasting room. There's a lot of dead time when you're in a tasting room and all that, and that's another thing for me too. We're open 7 days a week, same hours, because like literally all you need is one group to come in that's the right group, and that can make your week, and all that. So I took that actually. That's an old thing from my buddy Russell. That's Herman Story Wines. Like you got to be open. You got to be there. You got to be open. You never know what day is gonna be your day, and all that. So that part, yeah, definitely. Always being open. Like you can rely on us that like if you're coming to Tin City, you're going to be able to get a tasting experience at Field Recordings. But then looking then to the average sales transaction, like that's the biggest thing for me is just making sure that those people are leaving happy. They're like they're not so happy, but they're like they've chosen to like when you go on a weekend wine tasting trip, you got a budget for the weekend. I got to make sure I don't buy too much wine. Everybody knows that old thing, and talk to those people and it's like, well, the more percentage that we can get that they choose to put that weekend budget or allotment that they're going to spend on wine to take home from us is a win. So
yeah, absolutely. So for some of the smaller brands listening who are wondering, how do I get into private labeling for retail or for restaurant groups? Are there any protections that you think that they should insist on when going into an agreement like that so that it's more of a springboard and not like a distraction from what they are trying to do with their core?
You got to set it up kind of two ways, where you have some stuff that's sort of turnkey, where you have different restaurant groups that you work with where you're doing more of a control wine versus a private label and all that. But the one thing too, though, like just make it easy for them, and the business will grow. Like if you do a good job with good customer service for those restaurants or retailers that are interested in that, like the other thing that's surprising too is like you can get better margin than you think on those wines. So don't think that it's going to be a distraction and it's just going to be discounting the stuff that you're already doing.
Yeah.
You can, and also too, like, if you go into like old school, like sales, like acquisition costs and all that stuff, like, even if that first round is a little bit more of a distraction, that's a cash flow positive marketing scenario. Like you were actually paid money to provide something that could turn into something bigger. So if there's anything you can do like that, that's what I think a lot of the private label, control label stuff. It's like, hey, this one, like, and I've done plenty of deals where we're probably just trading dollars on it, but it got something started, and then who amazed where it turned into.
What's the margin that you're aiming for on those projects? Can you share?
I mean, when I start, I just want to make sure that it is profitable. That's like the big thing. But like it also depends on how we want to phrase it, how we want to set it up. Like, do we have to inventory that item? So if we're inventorying that item, or versus them taking it all at once, that's like one of the biggest components and everything for the margin. Like, I mean, hey, 10% margin is totally fine if it's something that we're just bottling and it ships out right away. Like, hey, that works. It covers the overhead and it's cash flow positive. Where if it's something where they can't take all that they're going to commit to, like you need to account for that, and you really need to price it more like you're doing one of your regular wines, and trying to be in that like push 40%, like 30 to 40. Like that's where we try to be on the margins on stuff.
Yeah. So as we sort of wrap up here, I'm wondering, with alcohol growth sort of normalizing post-COVID and consumers trading up for clear value, where is Field Recordings doubling down in the next year, and where are you kind of drawing back?
We're continuing to double down in orange and chillable red, just because we have such a good start in those categories that, as like you can go to the Chardonnay category and kind of like, an example like Jackson Family has such a great handle on that between KJ La Crema, all the labels that they've acquired through the years. Like, they've kind of like set themselves up to dominate the Chardonnay space. For us, it's like if I can dominate the orange space, the chillable red space, and be a fixture in that section of the store, like that's a win for me. So yeah, like focusing on those. We actually are going a little bit away from pet nat. We still are going to make pet nat always, and pet nat's going to be part of the program. But pet nat, my original motivation for making pet nat is I felt it was the best way to make a domestic bottle of bubbles that wasn't super expensive, because making method champenois wine is, you're handling it so much, the time that's needed, you're sitting on it for 3 years before you can even disgorge it.
Yeah.
It's a process, and all that. So, but in the end, the people that want inexpensive bubbles, like they're going to go buy Cava or Prosecco from the co-ops and all that. Like, unfortunately, that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
So with that though, we have pivoted where I actually am doubling down on Champenois. With how expensive champagne has gotten, we can make a really good domestic sparkling wine that is made method champenois that is a very good representation of sparkling wine. And I'm excited about that. Other stuff we're kind of doubling down on is any obscure green grapes, like anything like it's like, as of right now with like white wine and stuff, the possibilities are endless on different things that we can do for refreshing white wines. Like amazing the growth that you're seeing out there with Albarino sales. I mean, Sauvignon Blanc is insane with the, Sauvignon Blanc is kind of like the main thing now, but then also like Sancerre is so expensive now, and all that. And I think we have some other opportunities out there. Like, one of my favorite wines to drink is Muscadet, and it's amazing that Muscadet isn't consumed more than what it is. But, that's one, the French probably could rethink their marketing job on it to have a grape called Malone. You have a name for the region that somewhat resembles the word muscat, even though it has nothing with muscat character whatsoever. And then they put it in a tall hawk bottle too. Like, it's challenged right there. And that probably was one of my most favorite things. But like all these restaurants that are just pounding through Sancerre after Sancerre, it's like you could have probably bought some great Muscadet that would work great with the menu just as well and been a fraction of the price and stuff like that. So yeah, that's like we're working a lot with, I'm still planting new varieties. The nursery gig is a great enabler to where we might get some cuttings of something coming into the country. And so yeah, green grapes and seeing what else we can make with white wines out there. And then I'm also big on Italian reds. Sangiovese should be more of a mainstay in California. It grows great with the changing in growing conditions that we've been having the last few years. Like stylistically, like the flavor profile, even though like Sangio tends to have a little bit more of an austere, older, like some kind of think of like Chianti as like a grandparent wine. I think that flavor of red wine actually really resonates with younger consumers.
Okay.
Surprisingly, and all that. So, but yeah, Italian reds, more white wines that we can make, and then more champenois. That's kind of like our next three things that we're doubling. You could say we're doubling down on.
Okay. Love that. So doubling down on those, then where do you see your little hobby project in 5 years? Is it still a fake business or is it a real business at that point?
Yeah, we'll be closer to being a real winery. So no, but like I think we'll still be cruising. I hope, I mean, it's so wild right now with the way the wine business is and alcohol in general and stuff, but I feel pretty good about our chances that we're going to be just fine in 5 years.
Good. I like the optimism. So this is the last question that we ask every guest who comes on, and it is, if you were to recommend one resource, so a book, a movie, a person to follow online, to a drinks entrepreneur who's listening today, what would you recommend that they dive into?
I mean, the first one I always go to is read the book and watch the movie Moneyball.
Okay.
Like that's one thing too, I think is like, especially for a bootstrap small winery, like you got to think outside the box. Like, I remember years ago, it was at a Paso Robles Wine Alliance event and Adam Firestone was talking. He was running for the board, I think at the time. And he was like, the wine business is so unique because you have so many people that are just willing to lose money on it to be a part of it, and that hobby aspect of it. And it's like, truly, like we're up against absolute behemoths that have all relentless capital, or huge amounts of capital. They just want to get in the wine thing, and so when you're a person like myself, and I have a lot of peers like this is what I went to school for, this is all I know how to do, and all that. This is a trade. I do take that trade side to it. I think kind of dumb, but at the same time though, like I think you have to, every vintage you need to be thinking like, how can I be doing this different? Like you gotta do everything possible to make sure you don't fall into that, like luxury wine deal. Everybody wants to like work with the fancy vineyards, the fancy grapes and all that, but really, are those grapes really the best? Are they really worth the tonnage price compared to other stuff out there? And also too, like really, what do you want to make? Like, what are we trying to accomplish here and all that? Like, and I think that's something that for pop culture and just general stuff. I know there's a lot of made up stuff in the movie that doesn't go along with the book, but there's some good stuff there.
Okay, I love that. Well, we'll end by saying, look outside of the box. Yeah. Andrew, thank you for coming on today. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Oh no, thanks for having me.
Welcome back to Last Call. Today I learned that the wine I buy and the animal that's on the label might matter more than I thought it did. So Scott shared a really interesting visual essay that was published on Pudding, which is a digital publication known for making data beautiful and representing kind of culturally significant conversations through their visual essays. So they analyzed nearly 1,500 wines with animals on the label and grouped them into 16 broad categories that were not scientific at all, but were more about the vibes or how animals are perceived in our culture. And they compared each group's median price and then their Vivino ranking to find a great wine at a great price based off of the vibe of the animal. So it was surprisingly useful. You follow this tool. You get to kind of choose a wine at the beginning, and then it guides you through this narrative, showing you exactly how your pick stands up against other animals. So I picked a toad, and it turned out that is not a great value proposition.
I found it interesting that overall, the median price for wines with animals on the label, it was about $27. And that was $3 cheaper than wines without animals, which were about $30. But both groups had a median rating of 4 stars. So that means that above all else, you're better off buying any animal than no animal at all on a wine label, which is totally contrary to my thinking. I would not have thought that at all. I would have thought, yeah, no, that's probably not going to score highly. So among animal wines, it's important to know which animals have lower ratings and lower prices. Turns out that farm animals like cattle, pigs, and sheep all ranked lower and had lower prices. And bottles featuring animals like cats, bears, and mythical creatures all had higher prices and higher ratings. Now, you might be asking about birds because birds are on so many labels. And it turns out that a higher proportion of bird containing labels are good deals. So, like cat wines, there are more of these types of labels, but because their median price of around $26 is $4 less than the overall median of around $30, we see a higher percentage of good deals. That means that birds are a safe bet. And while birds had the highest percentage of good deals that was ranked in the first analysis, They then went back to see what animal is the best value overall. And the bottom line was to bet on fish. So 24% of fish were in the good deals quadrant, meaning they were offering the best deals overall, which, like I'm telling you, all of this was surprising to me, but pretty fun to take a look through. Scott, what are your thoughts about the deeper implications of these results?
Yeah, this is all good and well if you're a consumer and you're, putting a note into your phone next time I'm in the store, look for the label with the fish or the bird on it. But if you are a brand owner, how might you go about understanding the implications for something like this? And I think that the key is, this type of research, which was highly dependent, and they plot out their methodology, worth looking at if you're interested. But this type of research would not be possible without the use of AI, or it would be possible, but it would be very time and cash constraining with regard to how long it would take to gather everything, categorize it, understand it. I think if you are in the process of developing a brand, the use of AI to go out and gather data to give you an idea of where your brand might potentially sit, whether it's a wine brand, an alc brand, a non-alc brand, to understand the universe, right? This is not about saying, okay, if I'm going to develop a wine label, I'm going to put a fish on it and that'll make me win. But it does lead one to the conclusion that if I'm going to design a label, should I put an animal? Should I not put an animal? And what are the perceptions around it for the broader consumer groups? And knowing that before diving headlong into putting together something that you and or your friends or our business associates just think looks good is very different from understanding how it might be perceived by broader groups. So to put together something with a researcher, with a data analyst or scientist could really behoove brands that want to understand more about the competition and the category that they're competing in when it comes to consumer understanding. And it might mean scraping data from everything from websites like Reddit to wine rating websites to get a feel for what the competition is doing and how that is perceived.
And I told my colleagues here recently about a little TikTok study I did myself and used AI to analyze the TikTok comments. But we see a lot of brands utilizing tools like that where, I don't know, just ask the public and see what they have to say. I got nearly, I think it was like 9,000 comments back at the end of it all. And those are real people responding. So, and I ran it through AI, and you don't have a budget, you could probably do that too. So thanks again for joining us on the Business of Drinks. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, any place you get your podcasts, and tap the notification button. Follow us so you do not miss any episodes. Help us spread the word by sharing with your friends, doing star ratings, sharing on social. It really helps us find new listeners. And lastly, if there's anything that you want us to cover, please send us a message. We're on Instagram and LinkedIn in our DMs, or you can send us an email at podcast@businessofdrinks.com. Talk to you soon.